Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio presents The Open Door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. This is a program that is open to the love of God, open to joining His stream of love for others. And our panel today includes Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Catholic writer from Corpus Christi, Texas, Dr. Richard Garrity from Birmingham, Alabama, professor of philosophy at EWTN, writer of books about Aristotle's Ethics, Plato's Republic, and who was writing a book about Blessed Cardinal Newman's Apologetics. Also with us today is Katie Hughes in California. She's the daughter of Commander Al Hughes from Corpus Christi, Texas, colonel in the Air Force, a married father who converted to the church after being an agnostic and has degrees in engineering and in pastoral studies. And also in California is Dr. Jim Hannock from Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. So let's go to our leader, Commander Al Hughes. Take it away, Al.
Thank you, Bob, and good morning to everyone. Today's our topic is this: in what way does someone obey the unseen God, and why? Just before the program started, we had a very interesting discussion. Dr. Richard Garrity has some very good comments to make vis-a-vis Newman. And so, Richard, we'll let you get this started. How does someone obey the unseen God?
Right, and Newman poses this question after 350 pages of argument. You know, because the book is called An Essay in Aid of a Grammar of Assent. Well, that's pretty philosophical. Well, after 350 pages of argument, he asked that question. And he says, is it possible for a person to relate to the invisible God as if it's real? And notice he's not talking about a Catholic conscience now. Oh, but his answer is yes. Everybody does it through conscience. Now, and it's not just a Catholic conscience. It's a conscience that every human being has by the fact that they're a human being. And the relationship is this. It's one of a moral impotence or inadequacy. In other words, if you're trying to follow your conscience, you know it isn't that easy. So you sharply realize the good that you want to do, you don't do it, like St. Paul says. And the evil you don't want to do, you do it. And that leads to a certain discouragement or moral impotence. And then that's the motive that sets a person out reaching for God in a special way, revelation. And if you reach out that way, God then will meet the needs. And what God does is supplies the church, and it's the only institution, the only one, only society institution or flock that can heal the deep wound of sin. And that's the bottom line for all of us, with the exception of the Blessed Virgin. She's sinless. So that's what Newman has to say about it.
So, Al, before you continue, let me mention about this is a live show, and people can call in, and the number to call is 515-604-604, 9344, 9344, and the code number, when they ask you for it, is 914121. And maybe we have someone calling here right now. Do we?
I'm here listening.
Good. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Commander.
Thank you. I have before me here a quotation that from a very different source. It's William James, who was both a philosopher and a psychologist, Protestant. And he wrote this in the Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902. He says, as a rule, religious persons generally assume that whatever natural facts connect themselves in any way with their destiny are significant of the divine purpose with them. Through prayer and purpose comes home to them, and if it be trial, strength and endurance, to the trial given. Thus, in all stages of the prayerful life, we find a persuasion that in the process of communion, the energy from on high flows in to meet demand.
Okay, this is Rhonda. I have a nice thought about this. It sometimes seems to me, well, how could God possibly, even though he's God, how could he possibly keep track of billions of people? That's ridiculous. And so when that thought occurs to me, I then think, well, if the computer can keep track of all these millions and billions of people, of course God could.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've thought of that too. I think the answer, part of the answer is the fact that God being outside of space and time, in fact, the creator of space and time, he is not limited by space and time, and so he can do this. Not only keep track of the 7 billion that are here today, but present to him are all of the humans and all of life and creation from the beginning to the end of time, which is a pretty tall order, but anybody that can create the universe can probably handle that one.
Right. See, the reactions initially of Catholics to that statement of Newman is to say, well, Newman seems to be stained a bit with that fundamentalist or evangelical attitude he had when he was younger. So he seems to be obsessed with sin in an unhealthy way. See, and because, like the philosophers point out, God is beauty, God is goodness, God is sweetness, God is holiness. Why can't that be the face that we pick up? And Newman's answer is, that's not the face, if we're real, that we pick up, because we have a sense of failure if we're real about ourselves. So the initial look is, although God in himself is beautiful, wise, sweet, just, and all that, the face that we meet is one of being under the eyes of a judge and guilty. And thinking about it, I say, yeah, that is the Catholic doctrine. It ain't because he's an evangelical or negative or sin obsessed. It really is the Catholic Church's teaching and is the justification then for the existence of the Catholic Church, supplying confession and supplying authority, to sit over us and say, hey, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. That's the job of the pastor. You're wrong. You're guilty. Face up to it. Ask for forgiveness. And, I find that striking.
Katie, if you want to jump in, I know you're going to be leaving at the halfway point, so jump in anytime.
Yeah, I think what comes into play as far as the unseen God and being open to obeying Him, I think that the grace that God gives us and the faith that we can ask for, but to me, because Jesus came down to earth, He is not the unseen God, and even before Jesus came, God made His presence known, and gave us signs that He is the Creator and has a plan for us and gives us rules or the commandments to live by, to live in Him, and what He provides is everlasting life, because Jesus, died for us. So it's hard for me to think of Him as an unseen God at all, but I do understand there are people that have not received the grace or do not have an awareness of Him, but I think that's only because it's by partly choice and the veil hasn't been removed from their eyes.
Yeah, Katie reminds me, this is Al again, of something else. Something that came up many, many times during the 25 years that I was teaching converts, and many times people say, well, I've never heard from God. He doesn't answer my prayers. How do I know He's even there? Actually, there's an answer to that, and it's John 14:21. John is quoting Jesus, and this is what Jesus said. Very key. It's probably one of the most important statements in the whole New Testament. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father. I will love them and reveal myself to them. So if someone says, I never heard from Jesus or from God, I don't know if anybody's really up there, the answer is, have you obeyed His commands? Because that's who He reveals Himself to.
And the point is, and now we're talking about pagans, people who are not necessarily Catholics, and the point of contact is impotence, moral impotence. You see, and then you're in trouble. And like for instance, the alcoholics or people in 12-step, they're hitting bottom, and they're faced with the option of either killing themselves or reaching out for hope. But part of reaching out for hope is recognizing is, hey, they're responsible for what they've done. You see, and that fills with despair, and then you reach out. And then the hidden God ain't so hidden anymore. He appears, and then after the church comes, but then the church comes with its authority, 10 Commandments, which may repulse a lot of people. But you say, oh, it's all so negative and all that. Well, we're in a negative situation. And so if Newman is right, if we look at the United States today or look at the whole world, everybody has that kind of conscience. But see, in the modern times, a lot of effort is to say we don't have that kind of conscience. Our conscience is innocent and good, and it's the impositions the church trying to put on us that screws us up. So the church then becomes the great negative enemy.
Yeah, I find it quite true in a very practical sense. There are many, many people are willing to, whose basic attitude about life is, don't tell me what to do.
Right, right.
And that, I'm my own, when I'm the captain of my own ship, whatever that poem said. So a lot of people want to do their own thing, run their own show based on their own commandments, and that's where they get in trouble. And
Bob here. This is Bob here, Al. And I just interviewed a man who was come back to the Lord. He was born as a Catholic, was into drugs and alcohol and pornography, and you name it. I think it was probably for about 30 years. And there was no seeing God for him, I don't think. I mean, I'm sure he didn't think much about God. But what happened is somehow he and his brother went to a movie, The Passion of Christ. And there was one scene in the movie when Christ was coming out of a cave. I don't remember the scene myself, but that scene grabbed this man. It just overtook him, just that scene in the movie. And that was the beginning of his getting rid of all these things and coming back to the Lord. It took a few years because he relapsed a few times, but that was the start of it. And like you said, Richard, God just reached down and grabbed him, so then he became a seen God to this man who was into all these addictions.
Well, he had some glimmer of hope because he had given up hope on himself, and he admitted he can't do it. He can't do it.
He could not do it.
That's right, and that's then either you die in despair or you reach out to God with the hope He'll have to do it. And that's why in the 12-step program it's a very critical step. I don't
know if he was reaching. I don't even know if he was reaching out. They went to that movie, and it was God who grabbed him, just overtook him with that one scene.
Well, see, he's overtaken, but what he did bring to the movie was his moral impotence, his despair. Yes. I mean, he brought that. That's his contribution to the relationship. Right. And
now his brother, it didn't do anything for his brother.
Right. Well, maybe his brother wasn't as desperate a situation. See, actually, all of us are as desperate as those addicts, but addicts are more dramatically so.
Yes.
But others are, a little more successful and a little more coated, so they don't feel as desperate. So they can respond then to the beauty of God and to the goodness of God and things like that. For the addict, it's a much more desperate move. It's either that or croak.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Yeah, so the man came out of his own cave.
Yeah, exactly. He used to watch pornography like from 7 o'clock Friday morning till Sunday night.
Yeah.
And the more
you do it, the more impotent you feel, and the more ashamed you are of yourself, and you pick up and do it the next day for the same amount of hours, and it gets worse and worse.
Right. Anyway, that's...
Jim here, I've got a thought, pedestrian, and then another thought that might be of more use. The pedestrian thought is this guy who watched pornography for 2 days in a row must have had eye strain.
Right.
Now, here's a thought that might be more useful. When I hear Richard speak, I do think of the centrality of conversion in Scripture. And that's something we can't lose sight of. I also think of how when we are being brought through conversion, we're being brought through it to something. And one way of thinking of that which we're brought to is a kind of a unity. And God, of course, is consummate unity. And it seems like one of the great tasks of theology is trying to weave our insights together. And so Richard was speaking of the role of beauty, and that being an avenue for some, but the primacy of conversion. And when I think of unity, I think of the unity of the transcendentals, the good, the true, the beautiful, and the one. And when I think of unity from our everyday efforts, I think of our working together in our so many different ways for the common good, which includes all of us, which is a great source of unity and goal of unity. Now, to make a connection with obedience, we have in the common good a need for authority. There has to be direction. Without authority, we don't have the common good. We have a kind of collapse.
Right.
But authority requires obedience. If someone has authority over me, then I owe that someone obedience.
Right.
So I can't really pursue the common good, and we together in our myriad ways can't pursue the common good unless there's direction. But there can be no direction without authority, and there can be no authority without obedience. So we need to obey if we are to follow authority and recognize the common good. Now, we're very, very familiar with this idea of how can we love God whom we do not see if we do not love our neighbor whom we do see? How can we obey God whom we do not see if we do not obey our neighbor whom we do see? That is to say, our lives together are held together in good part by authority, and authority requires obedience. So that makes obedience to God tangible and everyday and
yeah, this is Rhonda. I was just thinking, can you imagine the policeman who is in authority? He stops you because you're speeding. Can you imagine he comes to your window and you say, well, I was just doing my own thing and I don't accept your authority. And I think somehow this panic we now have in our country, some people are listening from other countries, but in our country we have this big problem of people who hate the police, because there are certainly police who aren't good police, but I mean in general they are. So the idea that people are shooting up policemen is kind of very scary, I think, because it's sort of abandoning any sense that there's any authority over you whatsoever.
Yeah,
right.
That's the logical result of that feeling that nobody can tell me what to do, which is rampant in the society. I wanted to follow something Jim said about obedience to your neighbor. What does that mean? Primarily, it means an obedience in response to the needs of the other. You know, if you can help your neighbor, that's obedience to his need. And that's probably the bottom line of obedience to neighbor. Even if he has no formal authority over you, it's obedience to his needs as well as your own. And that is, I would say, the definition of love, which we talked about last week. That obedience to the needs of others, that's love.
Oh, okay, like with the driver again, it's obedience to the need of your neighbor for safe traffic. Because obviously if you're driving drunk 80 miles an hour down a 45-mile road, you're not obedient to any needs of anybody who's driving, right?
Right. And we need authority, but here's the other point. in the human condition, authority can be abused. And it is abused. You know, and a policeman can abuse it, a churchman can abuse it, a parent can abuse it, but that does not put aside the need for authority. So that means sometimes putting up with or suffering the unjust impositions of an authority. You know, we could handle it if we were sure that Christ was exercising it over us, but a lot of times people a lot less perfect than Christ are exercising authority over us, and they're using and abusing us. And that's what rankles the soul, and I suppose that's why we have to learn how to forgive our enemies, not as a luxury, but, a lot of people who shouldn't be turn out to be our enemies. We have to forgive them. And you say, oh boy, now we're getting crunchy.
Yeah, but of course Catholic teaching is you don't have to obey an authority if the authority says to do something immoral.
No, but then it says, all right, that authority will put you in the clink or execute you. And you have to live with that. So sure, you don't give in to it with your will, but then the authority says, okay, wise guy, we'll put you in jail or I'll execute you. Now, put that in your pipe and smoke it. See how that goes with you.
So these people become martyrs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, like Christ gets his son crucified, and he's God, for God's sake.
Yes, he is. Related to that, in the military, of course, everyone obeys, but there is a limit even to that, a limit to authority, and that is if you're commanded to do something that is illegal, then you have not only the right but the duty to oppose that. Well, the proviso is that you better be right when you do it, but you can, under that one circumstance, you can actually disobey a military command if the command violates the legality of the situation. Now, in combat, you kind of throw that out because there is no law in combat except when. But separate from.
You could throw it out. I could throw it back.
Yeah, but I'll throw it out again. You don't go to. That's why you avoid going to war, because there's no second place in war.
No.
But anyway.
No.
But anyway, the point being that even there is a limit to authority, except when you're talking about God, I can't imagine a limit on that authority.
Yeah.
And of course, that authority comes through the church and through people who are not always perfect in their exercise.
Well, and that's the cruncher. It comes through people, comes through human beings who Christ said they're the channels of authority in the sacraments, and they're not perfect, you see? Mm-hmm. And Christ knew this. See, when he gave that kind of authority to human beings, he knew this. He knew it would be abused. I mean, he already knew about Judas. And so you have a very crunchy kind of situation.
This is Jim, thinking about the range of Christian life and how all things work together for good for those who love God. Another kind of obedience is obedience to the call that one has, obedience to one's vocation. And we had spoken earlier of art and beauty. Think of the obedience that a true artist has to follow his or her art. And again, art in so many different forms: a writer, a painter, a sculptor, a poet, a film producer, a musician. There's a real obedience in following the demands of one's vocation. And I've often thought that young people reading Scripture, the Old Testament, must wonder, what is all this talk about idol worship? Well, I think as we advance in wisdom and grace and folly, all woven together, we recognize how many forms of idols there are. So I could imagine the temptation of an artist to fall down and worship some idol or other, maybe a commercial idol, or maybe an idol of fashion. One of the most powerful passages in Jacques Maritain is how there's a temptation on the part of philosophers to chase after some philosophical trend that has a lot of attention, and to not dig deeper into the truth as it really is. So there's that kind of obedience as well.
Yeah, and I often come back to the temptations of Christ in the desert, which can be interpreted as idols. The idol of wealth, power, wealth, and the easy life, all of which can become obsessive and therefore become idols in the minds and hearts of people, and as idols, basically worshiping wealth, worshiping power above all else, seeking the easy life above all else. All of those are idols as well. Those are the things that Christ in the desert resisted.
Of course, it is crucial that we get through our to-do list each day. There's some things you can't play fast and loose with.
Well, that I guess is a form of obedience too, and obedience to the need of the moment.
I think of the enormous rise in anger in our very relatively easy life situation in the United States. Not for everyone, but for many, many people, life is easier than it has ever been. And with that seems to come this tendency to be outraged simply if anything goes wrong, as it's called now entitlement. I mean, I'm entitled to the easy life, so how dare another driver go beyond the speed limit and cut me off? That's unbearably such an outrage that I have a right to chase him and kill him. You know, it's so extreme, reading the newspaper headlines. I don't read the newspaper anymore, but I read the web of Fox News. And every day there are 10 stories of absolutely inane forms of violence, which seem to come from, I just can't stand it that anyone balked my right to do things the way I want to do. So if my kid cries too much, I can feed the kid to an alligator. I mean, it's just so extreme now.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's not even getting into computer crashes.
Let me shift the topic just a little bit. This is Al. We've been talking about in the context mostly of folks who are resisting authority and are outside the church, et cetera, et cetera. What about the person inside that's really trying to follow the will of God, and they say, well, how do I do that? How do I know what God wants me to do? That's a different focus.
Yeah, well, you start with, of course, God doesn't want me to do anything intrinsically wrong. So people get confused because they're thinking about two goods, like should I be a priest or should I try to find a sweetheart and get married. So that's between two goods, and that's much harder to discern than anything that's intrinsically evil. You shouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. You should just never do it.
Right. Yeah. Starting with the Ten Commandments and going forward to Christ's summary of that, which is love God and your neighbor as yourself.
Well, one thing apropos of that is you have what you call the precepts of the church. And the church says, all right, you should go to Mass at least every Sunday. All right? And then over the year, you should at least go to confession once, whether you need it or not. And then you should receive Holy Communion at least once, whether you're in the state of sin or not. So it's kind of a minimal thing, but, see, the demand is it's regular. It's Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, or you say a prayer on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's constant. And amid all the confusion of why you should do another thing, that's set. And then all you have to do is do it. Yeah, but doing it day after day, we get bored, restless, unfulfilled, whatever. And then we have to keep slogging on just to do it, whether we feel like it or not.
Well, I find very interesting in this respect this whole story of David. And you have David, just vowing, I will not put my head on a pillow until I have built a house for God. And he was absolutely convinced he was supposed to build a house for God.
Right.
And then God tells him through Nathan, no, your son is going to build that house for God. Forget it. But, it certainly isn't that easy to figure out unless God talks to you through a prophet that clearly. Why would you think not me, someone else, if you're the king? It seems to me that's very difficult to figure out, that kind of thing.
Well, especially if you're a king and you're used to getting your way, see?
Yeah. This is Al. I think a person who's really following the dictates of the church and is in pretty good shape but wants to know what's God's will for me personally, I think one of the first things, assuming that they're following, love God and love your neighbor as yourself and doing the best, then the question is, but what about me? Am I supposed to do something special? And I think the first line of that answer is look to your own gifts as a clue and fulfill the talents that come out of your best gifts. And I think a lot of us do that instinctively anyway. Three of you are philosophers because that's your gift, and you almost cannot not do that. Just as others may feel like they've got to learn to do the violin play the violin as best as possible. That's their gift and their talent. I think that's the first line. But beyond that, a lot of people don't have that extreme singular gift or two or three that make it very clear with the direction they should go in. And not everybody gets called to the priesthood, or calling maybe far more than just words. It may be other methods of calling.
Well, one of the things I notice all the time, because I spend a lot of time with elderly people, is that generally people who have the vocation to be fathers and mothers, after their kids leave, besides trying to take care of them as best they can when they're spread out, they're fatherly and motherly to everyone they meet. So they're still using that same gift of that vocation, except with anyone who's in need, they act fatherly and motherly toward. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very common, very common. Pope Benedict XVI wrote something about that too. He says, very short, I'm not going to read it the whole thing. He says, all of us are interested in what heaven may think. So most of us are interested in signs, quotation marks. We get them in many ways, through what we read, through what others say, through what we see. God speaks quietly, but he gives us all kinds of signs. In retrospect, especially, we can see that he has given us a little nudge through a friend, through a book, or through what we see as a failure even through accidents. And if we remain alert, then slowly they piece together a consistent whole, and we begin to feel how God is guiding us.
Very nice, very nice, Al.
Yeah, and that's very real. That's essentially how I got to where I am, and I think a lot of other people do that. So there's more than one way. There's also the quote, if today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. That's Psalm 95. But you may hear his voice in many ways, not just a verbal statement of, okay, Al, I want you to do this today. That does happen too, but that's fairly rare.
Jim here.
Excuse me, one more point. What Benedict brings up is the practice of watchfulness. If you're not watching what's going on around you, if you're not aware of everything that's said and what's going on around you, you don't pick up the clues that Pope Benedict was writing about. So you have to develop a sense of holy watchfulness. That's the key word.
Yeah, Mother Angelica, people were asking her, how did she come to do a lot of the things she did, following the will of God? And she said, well, initially, she don't know what the will of God is, but she'd get an input and follow it. And if it led to other things and so on, it seemed like the will of God. If it collapsed and disappeared, okay, so it wasn't that way. So it's a kind of pragmatic feeling your way, and what seems to stick, well, then you keep doing it. Now, for instance, when she went down to South America, she saw this statue of the Christ child, and the Christ child told her, build me a temple. Well, she'd already been busy trying to construct EWTN and all that. So part of us said, oh, Lord, save us. I mean, what? Start building a temple? I don't even know what a temple is, but I mean, it sounds like a big project. And then she said, well, all right, I guess I'll do that, because that's the indication. Well, it worked out. So she so it wasn't like God came down and said, this is my will. No, it's her poking and hoping, and hoping maybe it's his will without any guarantee, and then seeing what happens. And then if it seems to be blessed with a certain amount of success, you keep doing it. And then if it gets stymied for some reason, well, then you got to stop it. So very pragmatic.
You have to be willing to make mistakes, and you have to be willing to fail.
Very much so. Very, very much so. And
Jim, did you have something there?
She wasn't one who didn't like to fail, that's sure. She's a tough lady. When she made up her mind she wanted something, she wanted it. See, well, hey, even tough Italian ladies, gotta admit, you can't get it.
God, what if she'd been German? Oh, man.
Yeah, right.
Jim, did you have something there you were trying to get in?
Here's a comparison, maybe. I think we've probably all read sometime or other about culture X, Y, or Z, in which the young braves, we could call them that, the young braves, are in search of a vision, and to have the vision, they have to undergo this or that terrible trial of some sort in order to have the vision. But we're also aware of...
It's called Vision Quest, I believe.
We're also aware of the lines in Scripture, and I can't place them very well right now, about how you don't have to do this or that to hear God's voice. It's a still small voice that's immediately at hand. And that's an indication of God's being present, and we don't have to go off on a search for God's voice. It's always speaking to us. So there's a contrast there, and then Rhonda was mentioning the horrors that we read of on a daily basis. We have this hideous phenomenon of martyrs who are martyrs. Why? Because they're suicide killers. And all of these people are celebrated as martyrs by those who support what they do. And yet, in Christian theology, we think of martyrdom ultimately as not some heroic act coming from our steely resolve, but as a theophany, a showing forth of God. Look how God is present. We don't seek martyrdom or impose martyrdom, but from time to time, martyrdom visits us as a theophany, as a showing forth of God. And on this theme of showing forth and God's taking the initiative, this is coming back to a story I bet you've all heard, but it's the same sort of theme of the, as we say nowadays, the developmentally disabled in a class somewhere or other, in some parish or other, and the pastor wants to have a confirmation for them. Well, some people think this might not be quite the thing, and as the story goes, the bishop comes to visit, and he wants to talk to them to see if they're really confirmandi suitable. And the pastor decides to have the class in the church when the bishop comes, and there's some beautiful stained glass windows in the church, and they capture your attention. At any rate, the bishop says, well, now, class, what is a saint? What is a saint? And someone says, looking at the window, a saint is someone who lets the light shine through.
Beautiful. No, I never heard that story. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It's somebody who lets the light shine through, and it's not like you're sitting there waiting for the light to shine. The light is always shining, and you've just got to let it shine through. So
yeah, on that subject of God is constantly talking to us quietly. I recall when I was in the spiritual director school, somebody said, well, how do I know that's not just my subconscious? And Abbot David roared back, how else would God speak to us than through our subconscious?
Very good.
Never forget it. Never. If any of the panel that knew him, you can picture that. He just came roaring back. How else would God speak to us but through our subconscious?
I think an aspect that we haven't touched on yet is the fact that if you really believe that evil spirits are trying to prevent us from doing good, then one of the ways they prevent us is by saying, well, you see, this is so hard for you to do, it couldn't possibly be God's will. And one of the things that got me through parenthood was I was escaping from child-raising duties by reading Chesterton, and I came upon this line of Chesterton, famous line, anything that's worth doing is worth doing badly.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
And I said, okay, that's the sign. I've got to keep raising my kids no matter how pesky it seems to me. Jim, by the way, this is a very funny story that I love to tell. I'm trying to figure out, because it involved Jim's wife, Elizabeth, who was a dear friend of mine. So I'm complaining to her about how can it take 2 years to teach a kid how to tie his shoes. And she laughed at me and she just said, get Velcro, Rhonda.
Oh, it solves so many problems, Velcro.
Yeah.
So many times we need to be encouraged in our vocations by other people where the devil wants us to get totally discouraged because of failure or lack of what we consider to be success. Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, another person in your family, see, Jim's family was very close to our family when we both had children growing up. And I remember one of the kids in your family said, we love to come to your house, Rhonda, because even though people got angry and had arguments, they always forgave each other and made up. We thought that was very good.
Yeah. Excellent.
I love this quote from Thomas Merton about the will of God. He said that we all want to do the will of God, but we don't always do the will of God. But the fact that we desire to do the will of God pleases God.
That's Thomas Merton.
Oh,
Yep.
Very nice, very nice.
I don't know, I think that fits in here.
Yeah, Thomas Merton wrote a poem, I think it was.
Yes.
Along that line. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the effort. We do get ease for effort, I think, as long as we're trying to do the best we can.
Right.
That's like Rhonda and her Velcro. You do the best you can, and that's good enough for God. Even failure is okay for God if you did the best you knew how to do in the moment.
Oh boy!
When Rhonda mentioned that Velcro, I thought, well, in the military, that's called outflanking the enemy.
Right.
Golly. How are we doing on time, Bob? No, we got a little.
Well, we got about 8 minutes left.
Okay. Do we have any callers coming in?
Now, did our unseen listener want to say anything?
Well, I've been very impressed by this whole thing. It's beautiful. I was taking notes, so I'll give you an idea. That's something, right?
Good.
That's good. Yes, it was very beautiful.
Is
Beautiful.
that Marty? Is that
Yes.
Marty?
Yes, this is
Yes.
Marty, yes.
Sure. Yes.
Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you. And even ending what you said about desiring to do the will of God, it pleases them, just that all by itself. But I think the connection with obedience, one of the things I thought of is those whom we obey oftentimes are the people who make us safe. For example, obviously God, but our police and so forth. So when we are obeying someone, we may need to obey these people more than we realize. So that's one take I had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah.
See, one thing in the prayer, it says, thy will be done. And we say that in the prayer, no matter what we're feeling. I mean, it's part of the prayer. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then you can ask yourself, many times, how sincere are you in saying that? And then you say, well, I don't know. But I mean, hey, you keep saying it, see? At least this is what you should feel, whether you feel it or not. So you say it publicly. saying it dutifully, and then hopefully maybe at a certain point you'll say it with more real conviction. But in the meantime, just say it. Say it as you try. At least you want to be in the game, although you may be quite reluctant to really get into it. Well, the prayer handles that. Say it. Do it. And at least you have some satisfaction. You did something right.
Yes.
Well, there's a kind of pride in thinking when you're choosing between good things that you have to be perfect and you have to have the perfect answer and you could never make a mistake and all that kind of thing. People don't realize when they're doing that there's a kind of pride in it. I mean, when it's not a sinful thing but just a mistake in judgment about how to figure out this thing or that thing, giving it that much importance and feeling that whether this thing succeeds or fails, sometimes when I'm in prayer and I think Jesus is talking to me, he'll say, it really doesn't matter so much what's going to happen to you at this stage in your life. What's important is that you're close to me and you're trying to be loving, not whether you do this scheme, this project, that project. Maybe it doesn't matter so much.
Yeah,
that pride is you want to go down with this beautiful swan song, perfect swan song, all that. That's kind of, vain almost.
Yeah, and you can't be afraid of looking like a fool or making mistakes.
Apropos, there's the famous Thomas Merton. And you'd think that because he was such a great spiritual writer, that he would die in a state of trance-like bliss or some horrendous struggle or something like that. And here he dies getting electrocuted by the bad wiring in a fan in a hotel in Thailand. It seems totally idiotic, but it doesn't make any difference.
It fell into the bathtub, the fan.
Yeah.
And that was it for Thomas Merton.
So may we all be longing to fall into the arms of God when we die and not to have some sort of aesthetically beautiful death. Let us just long to be with you, dear Jesus, who came to save us.
You mean we don't all get assumed into heaven?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I haven't known anybody lately.
Okay,
any words from anybody? Go ahead, Bob.
Time to wind up.
All righty. So next week, Dr. Richard Garrity is going to lead us next week in the subject of metaphysics. What is it? Why is it? And how is it done? So until next week, and we wish everyone a great week and stay close to the Lord. Bob?
Amen.
Amen.
And what I would say is that may the Lord bless each and every one of us and those listening. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, all of you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.